and welcome to the Integration Station. I'm your host, Michael, a child and adolescent occupational therapist. With me today is Eleanor.
I'm also a child and adolescent occupational therapist.
How you doing?
Good. How are you going?
Very well. Looking forward to today's episode, talking about some differences between the zones of regulation and the engine program.
Yeah.
So good chats there. We're not doing as many Q&A this week, but normal format is Q&A, and people can send in questions to podcast.otfc group. That's our email. Otherwise, .au, thank you, yes. Otherwise, at OTFC group is our handle on Instagram and on TikTok as well.
Yeah.
You can send us the questions and we'll answer and find the fun in learning how to support the young people in our lives. But I thought we could start with maybe a quick activity of the week segment.
Yeah, sounds good.
Normal regular segments. Let's start with that one.
Regular segments.
Therapy activity of the week.
So therapy activity. So yesterday I had a young man. I've done some stuff with him in the past. I think I've mentioned some of the activities I've done with him in previous episodes.
Yeah.
We had a really cool one where, not a groundbreaking activity, but the aim was to use a swing, but it was a little bit higher, the platform swing, a big rectangular swing, a little bit higher. And what I was trying to do was get him to figure out how to get up onto that swing, so to work on those motor plans. Mm-hmm. And then whilst we were once he got up there without my support, working on how to maintain the speed of the swing or change direction because it can rotate a bit.
Yep.
So what I was trying to do was allow him to problem solve before I stepped in and helped out. So I know we talk a lot about adaptive responses, and so the activity itself, and I had an OT student and an AHA with me as well assisting in the session.
Right.
So what I was doing was explaining to them why I was doing what I was doing. And so what happened was he spent a bit of time getting up, a minute or so, but he did it. And then I gave him a gentle push to get started in the swing. And the activity was catching bean bags and then trying to throw them at these foam blocks on a balance beam, which in the previous activity he'd stepped over as like obstacles to try and step over. So it built in that activity to the swing. But the whole point was to try and get him to figure out how he can maintain the momentum of the swing, catch with two hands whilst not trying to hold onto the rope as much, but also readjust his position as he started to rotate, or if it started to get a bit wobbly, how he could adjust his posture. So there's all these little micro adjustments and all these very, very slight adaptive responses that if you're looking for it, you'll see it. If you don't, then you'll go, oh, he's just staying on the swing.
Yeah.
Right? So it was I think, and I spoke to one of the AHAs after, that he thought it was a great learning opportunity for him as well. And for me, it was really encouraging to see him, my client that is, have success in that moment without me having to intervene.
Yeah.
Right? And so there was a point where I was pushing for a bit and then I stopped and I could see him getting his feet back up this mat to build his own momentum and then using his foot as a rudder to stop him from spinning when he was rotating. And that was unprompted. That was him just doing it. So that was excellent. And he was able to then transfer some of those adaptive responses to another activity we did soon after with the flying fox. And it was interesting because what I was looking for was his change in affect from the balance beam task. He was, a little bit engaged, a bit uncertain. He got onto the swing and he started to pick up a bit more. He doesn't have a lot of words.
Yep.
And so a lot of his non-verbals are a very clear sign of his arousal and how he's feeling.
Yeah.
And, the reason I'm thinking of this because it really ties into that engine chart. So I could see him hitting that the challenge was just right. And his arousal level was being supported by that movement on the swing, and he seemed to really enjoy that.
Yeah.
And so then when we went to another task that was more challenging, he was able to take on that challenge. And he'd had some success from changing and adapting responses in one task, transfer over to another one. So
that's awesome.
That was my activity.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I can hear that he's getting like a lot of feedback in the movement to support those adjustments and how he knows that he needs to move his body, and that's not coming verbal prompts from you, that's coming in what he's actually registering in the moment, which is, that's awesome.
Exactly.
Lots of sensory integration going on there. You were mentioning about the Just Right challenge before, and I feel like we talk about that a lot, but that's been something that I've been really trying to bring into conversations with my clients as well. So maybe instead of an activity for the week, I'll have a discussion in my activities.
Perfect.
Where I so often am chatting with my clients about the Just Right challenge. And if we're doing something and they're having a degree of success, and it seems like it's coming quite easily for them, I'm looking at that with them and going, well, actually, you know, you've absolutely smashed that. I think there's an opportunity here for us to extend that further. And then when we hit that just right zone where it's incorporated a level that's a bit more challenging for them, but they're still absolutely able to do it, then labeling that for them to almost go to help them recognize that this is where the skill building opportunity is, and to check in with them and go, now, do you feel like this is just right, or do you feel like we've pitched this too hard? And so often they're able to say, no, I think I can do this. And then I'm like, awesome. Then I think we know that's the just right space there. And then try and encourage that resilience to persist, and labeling to say, well, actually, if we've hit the just right zone, you're not going to get this straight away. So this is going to take us a fair bit to work through it. We'll problem solve it. We'll try it together, and we'll see if we can work our way through it. So I think even having those conversations about what it means to have the just right challenge is so helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we check out some regulation strategies?
Sounds good.
Regulation, the strategy of the week.
I've got a bit of show and tell for my reg strat today.
Do you?
I do. I brought in my engine chart.
Oh.
Which I've made. Shall I show for the camera? While Eli's recording as well.
Yes.
What is an engine chart? So what I've got is a little picture in front of me here, a little visual that I've made for myself, but it is a great way to check in about how your body is feeling. And I think the engine analogy is something that kids can respond really well to, because it's essentially trying to check in about what those levels of alertness are looking like. And for so many of our young friends that come through here, their bodies can run literally pretty fast, but that's actually just indication of those heightened states of arousal. Their bodies are moving quickly. They're not maybe as regulated as they could be for the tasks that they need to do. And so getting them to check in and recognize, well, what does it mean for you if your body's running fast? And what do we need to do to get into that just right zone, ready for the activities? And of course, being a scale, there's a slow end of that too. And I would say that there are just as many young friends who are actually recognizing when their body's running slow is important to help bring them up into the just right zone. And so I think at any point we could be sitting in each of these three zones. And it's just a great visual to help unpack, well, what does it feel like for my body in each of these sections, and what helps me to get into the zone that I need to. So even as a bit of an example, if I flip over to the back of my chart, thank you so much. Michael's holding it up for me, which is really helpful. But, you know, for me being in the just right zone, I guess I'm feeling focused, I'm feeling relaxed, I'm ready to learn, I can control my body and my movements, I can follow instructions. But sometimes if I start to shift into that fast zone, I feel like I'm moving quickly. It's a little bit trickier for me to do that. If I'm saying me, but I'm maybe speaking a bit more broadly about some of our young friends that come through here as well. Perhaps for them that they're making more unsafe choices, or we start to see some of that impulsivity shift. We're seeking out big movements, we're running and we're jumping. And even sometimes in that faster zone, maybe where those emotional responses can come through a little bit more as well. And the flip of that in that slower zone, maybe I'm feeling lethargic or slower, or it just, you know, like I don't have as much energy, feeling a bit more flat. And even just being able to identify what that kind of, how that feels, and it's different for everyone. And so often when we talk about, well, what can I do in those moments? Movement is such a key part of all of that, and different bodies respond to different input, and it's just working out what's going to work best for them. Yeah.
Engine chart is almost like that OT 101, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think all OTs use some element or aspect of the engine chart, or arousal states, or how you're feeling and how your body's running. Probably ties in to our topic today. We're talking about very, very nicely, which is the engine program versus zones of regulation. Obviously, zones of regulation is another, emotional sensory regulation tool, and so is the engine program. So, I guess when I'm thinking of that engine program, it comes back to as you said, how is our engine running? Is that analogy of like a car, an engine that's going fast, or an engine that's going slow, or the engine that's in the just right zone, using that analogy to help young people understand how their body is feeling. The engine program comes from Williams and Schellenberger from the early 90s, and they developed this concept of this optimal state of arousal. And so if you've seen any, say, of our reports or in our sessions in the treatment rooms, you'll see some different visuals, and one of them is this one which we've talked a bit about before, which looks at different, it's like that little like wiggly worm with different colours.
Yeah.
And there's one which is this green one, which is when we're in an optimal state of arousal.
Yeah.
And it has different levels of, I guess, bands of arousal. So, the green band, if you will, is that optimal state of arousal, and there's the yellow one, which is, slightly over excited, and then the red, which is in this sensory overload.
Yeah.
And using that as a way to help understand how the sensory world around us can impact what we call our sensory modulation. And that's where the engine chart comes in. It helps us label that and uses the analogy of an engine to help a young person identify maybe where their body is at a particular point in time.
Yeah. And I think what's really important about that visual that you've referenced as well, we're thinking about this optimal band like you've referenced, which essentially means that what we're really aiming for is that even with fluctuations in what those levels of alertness look like, they still sit within this band that helps us do the things that we need to do in our day in a way that we need to. And so, yes, whilst there can be, those arousal levels can shift outside of that, and we're trying to work out how we can bring it into that zone, I also recognise that for some young people, that band can be a lot narrower. And so even small shifts in that state of arousal can shift one way or the other or bring us out of that space. So it's also recognising what the band looks like and how we can optimise engagement within that.
I had a conversation with a young man I'm working with. He's in his mid-20s, and we talked exactly like that. He identified, we spent a lot of time working on aspects of interoception and identifying when our body is actually telling us what's going on and picking up on those cues. The challenge for him is being able to have the right self-regulation tools or the regulation strategies. So at times he's feeling really fast, or he's feeling overwhelmed or, frustrated, but he feels like he doesn't have the strategies to bring himself back down.
Absolutely.
And so,
I get that.
Identifying it is a really important first step.
Yeah.
And that's why the engine chart works really well, is to go, I can see, or can you see that your body is responding a particular way, or it looks like your body's responding in a particular way, or however you label it.
Yeah.
And that gives them, that young person, the language, that awareness that you're building from an early stage to be able to identify, if I feel this in my body, it could mean this.
Yes.
Not if I feel this in my body, I don't know what to do.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting about what you've said, sometimes I think about these kind of like two different levels when you're implementing a strategy like this. And I think when you're introducing it for a young person, that the expectation would be that perhaps you can have lots of chats around that, but their ability to implement that independently without support is quite low. And so the level of support that's required is higher. And I'm going to do that thing with my hands where I use that to alternate and create these kind of two levers. But then your aim is by practicing it ongoing in your sessions or in other spaces, that our ability to recognise that and implement strategies comes up for the young person, and then therefore the level of support that's required comes down, and so then the balance shifts the other way. But that can take a long time to build towards that, and I think it's the understanding of, well, just because I introduce a tool like an engine chart doesn't then mean that they've got everything they need to manage that successfully. And actually probably in those really early stages, they're going to need a lot of support around them to put that in action in the moment.
When you're introducing an engine chart, do you use a generalized, this is Johnny and his engine runs like this, or do you go in very specifically saying, this is, the client you're talking about and your engine chart is this, and we start to like you've done with yours, you've adapted it to make it specific to you? Yeah,
and do you know what? I've got two little friends that I'm working with at the moment where I'm introducing this concept to. One friend that I've worked with, he's a little bit older, such a cool guy. He is having at the moment a really great capacity to have some of these conversations. So I'd actually kind of pitched to him like some of the things that he's managing in the classroom. I'm just like, I can't help but feel that actually maybe your body has moved outside of this just right zone and your body's actually running fast, and helping him kind of label that. I'm like, what does that feel like for you in that moment? And he can have that conversation with me. And then we workshop this, what this looks like for him. And I suppose I had generally introduced it maybe a session or two beforehand, where I'm just using general concepts around, I can see our bodies moving really quickly. What do you think our body might need to come into a space that we can do what we need to for our OT session? And then I've kind of built out from that to go, when I'm talking about that, I'm referring to something that's called an engine chart. I found it really helpful for me. I'm wondering if I can share that with you. And in the next session we basically spent the whole session chatting about these things, moving and adding on to it. So by the end of the session, I had something very tangible for him to walk away with, which was really cool. The reason I have the engine chart that I've brought in with me today is because I wanted to introduce it for a younger friend who's in reception, who interestingly, he'd actually brought that conversation up. He's like, sometimes my body feels like it's in this zone, and it makes me feel like I want to, punch and move. I'm not actually going to do that, but that's how I feel in myself. And I had just started some general conversations again around that. But I know for him, the demand of sitting down and talking about this that's not going to be right for him. But I did label that, actually what you're describing reminds me a lot of my engine chart. And so I made myself one to bring in. And so I actually brought in a blank one that didn't have these pictures and things on there so that he could layer that on there. At the end of the session, he actually took it with him, the blank one that I had. So I think even that's just planting the seed.
Absolutely. To
label that in an organic way as much as possible around the activities that we're doing and a strategy for home, and then see if over time we can layer in that conversation. So I think you can really pitch it depending on the age that you're working with, I reckon. And I think that's what I really like about this, that you don't even just that basic visual without too much explanation within that can be something that can land really well.
And I think that ties into the next one. So compare that with another sort of program, which is the Zones of Regulation, which a lot of people are quite familiar with. It's a bit more recent. So this came out in 2011 by Leah Kuipers. She's an OT as well. So she developed this similar sort of labeling or color coding zones representing emotional and arousal level states. So there's things like the green zone, the yellow zone, the red zone. And this is something that I think some schools adopt a little bit more. And I'm hearing
a lot of that,
and I know
they'll teach that at a class level rather than, and so everyone's got access to something like that, which I think's awesome.
Yeah, and I think the target audience for this was aimed at being a little bit younger.
Yeah.
Hence that it's something that can be used a bit more broadly across an age spectrum, where I think initially the engine chart was for slightly older, 8, 9 plus, but not saying that you can't do it for younger ones. But that was the point of difference. But I guess the Zones of Regulation certainly has stronger links to emotional states, as opposed to, say, the engine chart, which is very much around that sensory and arousal level, as my body is needing this, or my body is showing these signs. It's very physical. Whereas the Zones of Regulation ties more into that emotional awareness. So the engine chart for us has always been something we've used a lot more because of its stronger links with sensory integration. Whereas I think the Zones of Regulation has a bit more of that cognitive behavioral therapy approach to it. And so it has a little bit more, how does our body feel and how does that link to our emotions? To be fair, you could actually use them side by side.
I do agree with that.
And it just depends on what you want to use in which context. So, for example, I know that at my son's early learning centre, they had used some of these Zones of Regulation strategies to support him. Now, my only issue at times with the color coding is that when he was saying that when he's feeling calm or in an optimal level of arousal or a just right state, that was blue. But they suggest blue as a lower arousal, slower. But the reason is because blue's his favourite colour. And when he's happy, he thinks of blue because that's his favourite thing. So what we were able to do was adapt it to go blue's a just right zone. That's what you're feeling. So we're able to adjust it. And I think the same with something like an engine chart. Just because red is fast doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be denoted to that colour, and I think it's about identifying and what works. But that for me, that's the only, I guess, slight catch with something like having colours for zones.
Definitely.
Is that then you have to place someone into that, or place how you're feeling into a colour. And I understand that that having that that tangible aspect or that visual of color can certainly help. But as I said in my son's example, if it doesn't line up with how you're feeling, then you could get a lot of confusion there.
Yeah.
So initially, you've learned that blue is a lower arousal or slower state.
Yeah.
But that's not how you feel.
No.
Then when someone hears I'm in the blue zone, they think, oh, you need to be picked up. It's like, actually, I'm feeling okay.
Yeah. But I think it sounds like what the ELC was able to do there is exactly what you want to see when you're using a tool like this. It provides an awesome framework to support these conversations and, start labeling some of these things. But the idea is, of course, that you can adapt that based on that young person. I've had engine charts that were all pinks and purples and, they chose the colours for that. And I think that's what's really cool about it. You can label that in a way that feels unique to that young person or aligns with their interests and what they're going to respond to. And so if you're going to do something like the zones of regulation, but you need to adjust and be flexible, I think that's really worthwhile as well.
Yeah.
I think what I quite like about the engine chart, is that I often get my friends to attach something to it that they really like to help them in labeling that. So it's probably sometimes a little less about the colours and more about sometimes a picture that they associate. So I've done ones that have involved Pokemon or I have a friend who loves different fish, and so he's got his 3 zones on the engine chart there's marlin and flathead.
Love it.
And so actually when we're saying that he's running fast, it's not like he's in the red zone, he's in
Marlin
zone.
They're very fast swimmers.
Yeah.
70 k's an hour in the water sort of thing. That's a very fast speed for a fish.
I'll be sharing that fun fact next time we're researching together.
Anyway.
Because I'll kind of check in and be like, I'm marlin. I'm like, awesome. That's helpful to know. So what does our body need to help get back into the space that we need to? So that's what I also quite like about an engine chart. On my engine chart, I've chosen animals.
Yep.
As you can see there.
Yeah. And in the past, I haven't done a lot of engine charts for a while because I haven't worked with a lot of the really younger children where that's come in. But I think back to when I was doing a lot of engine charts. What was number one? Probably number one was Pokemon.
Yeah.
Big red Charizard as as the fast, and the slow poke or slow bro is the slow, and then just right, was something like Pikachu. Right, and always Pikachu. Pikachu's just the right level, or so or sometimes I'd use Vaporeon as the blue one, a bit slower than Jolteon, the electric one, and then just
the
standard
evolutions. Yes,
correct. Anyway, for those who are Pokemon lovers out there, Gen 1 only. Sorry, I can't go beyond.
Exactly. So don't ask me about anything beyond the first 150. I've got no idea.
So it can be adapted. And I think that's why I do like the zones of regulation, because particularly for a school setting, I can understand why that's adopted, because it can be more generic, or it can be more broad for a curriculum, as opposed to the engine chart, which I think you'd want to make very specific.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
And very tailored to that individual.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That you say, okay, you're just right as this, or this is what it looks like, and these are the animals, or these are the images, or this is what it feels like to you. So you can really, not saying you can't do it with the zones of regulation, but I guess that understanding that sensory modulation is a little bit more designed for the engine chart.
And I can understand the zones of regulation. I suppose it's got groupings under each of those colours, right, about what different emotions or presentations might fit within each of these zones. And so when you're labelling which zone you're in, I suppose you're kind of looking at that chart and going, well, I think I fall under one of these categories, where I suppose the engine chart sits a little bit more but this is specifically what my body looks like in these 3 spaces, and I know how to recognise that. Like for one of the friends that I was referring to that we've just been having really awesome chats, he had referenced that, he can be a little bit more distractible in the classroom, or without always realising, I think, start to fidget or make vocalisation. So for him, that's very specific to know, well, that's how I know your body's starting to run a little bit faster. And so what do we need? And he just thrives off of movement. So we're looking to really use that and build out things almost like a sensory diet to help give his body what it needs, so that he's not necessarily accessing that with things that are really ingrained in his toolbox. And we can find something that, maybe is a bit more purposeful in meeting those needs and help him do what he needs to do. You mentioned sensory diet. I know that's something we've alluded to in previous episodes and kind of talked a little bit, but the sensory diet very much does tie into that engine chart. It's like, this is how your engine's running. What are some activities that we can do? And I that's one thing I do use a lot when I'm working with teenagers and adult clients, is a sensory toolkit. And I always talk about, particularly for young adults, is we're not going to be accessing
therapy spaces like we have at that age as consistently, and you might be a high school student, or you might be in a workplace, and you need sensory modulation strategies or tools.
Absolutely.
Let's have a transferable sensory toolkit, which is essentially the same as a sensory diet, but for an adult, and that works very well, and it certainly ties into that understanding how that engine is running, or how the body is feeling, and what we need. One thing I would say, and this is probably more from that neurodiversity lens and that sociological movement, is there's some questions, which I understand, about things like an engine chart, things like zones of regulation, as you are telling that person what they're feeling. It's not neuroaffirming to tell them they should be feeling this, or when you're blue you should be in this zone. Or
do you know what's really interesting? I've actually been thinking that a lot too, and I know that even extending that, I think that often comes into, using, picture cards to go, how do you think this person's feeling? And they're trying to label based on that, and making that expression of emotions and understanding of emotions more prescriptive. And so I really understand that as well. And I think I'm really trying to be more mindful with the engine chart now, that it's not, you don't always have to be in the just right zone. And actually these zones lend itself well to different
activities.
Different activities, different parts of the day. I think about there's actually a lot of benefit to being in the fast zone sometimes when you're doing something where you need to think quickly and have fast reflexes and all of that kind of stuff. But then it's just using it as a tool to adapt, well, where do I want my body to be to do the things that I need to? And so, yes, I really understand that. And I think you don't want it to be as prescriptive as that, or to only align your internal experiences with, it doesn't always fit as neatly into those different boxes. And so I think just acknowledging that, maybe it's even going with that young person, well, even like what you were just sharing, that, well, I don't feel like when I think of this zone, it doesn't make me think of this. It's about being flexible in how you adopt that, and allowing variations from that, knowing that everyone's got their own personal experience. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. And I think it just reinforces the importance of making it unique to the individual, being collaborative with that. And the whole point of this is not to tell someone this is how your engine's running. The whole point of it is that psychoeducation.
Yes.
This is a concept. Does it work for you? Great. Let's talk about how it relates to you. You tell me your experience. I can help you put that into a category where it might fit, and then you're actually describing to me what you're feeling, and now we're just putting that to this concept. And, things like zones of regulation, that can work quite well too. And I see the number of times I've seen things like, inside out characters as a visual to represent, because people go, okay, yes, I feel like joy and that time, and that fits into this category. I mean, joy is yellow, so it's not quite the yellow zone, but for some people it might be. Some people it might be. So I think regardless, if you are, we talk about cookie cutter approaches, that doesn't work for this stuff. It has to be quite detailed, and it has to be thought out well, and in conjunction with a young person and a parent, because for a lot of these situations, whether it's zones of regulation or engine program, you're going to have to work on that co-regulation, that modelling, that teaching. I mean, I always encourage parents to have their own as well.
Me too.
To go, what does your engine look like? So when you are teaching that young person, my engine is this. And I do that a lot for things like interoceptive questionnaires or interoceptive principles, to go, well, I feel this, and this is me. What's it like for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think often when I introduce anything like this, I'm not leading with, well, this is what I think it looks like for you. I always have these conversations from my lens, being like, hey, this is something that I find really helpful. Can I share with you what this looks like for me? And I'm curious to hear what it looks like for you. Same with like the feelings volcano that we were talking about the other week. I always, pitch my own experience just to start the conversation, and then allow them to guide what that looks like, because you're so right. I think that's so important, and you would never want to unintentionally invalidate how someone's feeling by going, well, you're not, you can only fall under one of each of these. It's okay that it is different for you. It's different for everyone. And actually, I'll never forget, I went to do an engine chart with a friend of mine a number of years ago, and they came back the next week, and the parent was like, look, we've been talking about it over the week. It's just not resonating, because this friend it's like, well, I'm not a car. I don't have an engine. I'm a person. And then I've just gone, well, I'm not going to then spend more time elaborating on that further to try and get him to come around to it. That's not the right fit for him. So how else can I help him understand how his body might be feeling and what it might need? and do it in a way that works for him.
And we talked about the other week about, the construction metaphor to talk about different pathways and roadworks and those sort of things, and how and there are so many different ways, different metaphors, which you want to try and find one that works to help that understanding. But sometimes some people, we talked about Karen Young's amygdala and the Hey Warrior book, and understanding how the brain works. And yes, you can put those metaphors in, but some kids just want the hard facts.
Yeah.
Some kids just need to know this is what it looks like. These are the facts. This is the information. Go with whatever works.
It's great to have a number of tools like this at your disposal so that you can work out the path forward together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess there are lots of pros to both, and I'd say this is a sweeping statement, but I'd say that the zones of regulation certainly works for a larger scale, say a classroom setting, where the engine chart, even though I've seen engine charts used in classrooms as well, I think that's probably better suited for an individual person.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think they can be used in conjunction.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people out there who are looking at using these tools, I guess in summary, it comes back to understanding that client's preferences, their needs, what their level of understanding is.
Yep.
Because I would also say that if you have clients who maybe are non-speaking or maybe have difficulty with cognitive capacity, they can still understand this if it's pitched in a visual way and it's very much I can see what's going on here. This looks like this, and you're trying to help them develop those strategies. So when we think of those two approaches side by side, then I can see lots of pros for both, and specific situations you might use one
definitely
versus the other.
And I think, in either of these, using it as a tool to help that young person label how they're feeling, not for you to label it for them, like you were saying before.
Correct.
That it's, it's not a matter of saying, oh, I can see your body's doing this, you must be in this zone. It's, comment on your observations, I can see this. I wonder if it's feeling like, and they will tell you, yeah, I think so, or no, I don't feel like that. I actually feel like this. You're like, oh, that totally makes sense. It's just, a bit of a springboard.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for the discussion
that
there.
was really good.
Sorry, I think I might have been in the fast zone for half of that podcast, so I'm glad we were able to co-regulate and work together.
But I get that, when you've got a list of things that you need to do across the day and things that you have to get to, it makes sense that you will be in a zone that helps you match the pace of your day, right?
Yeah, and if you have a double shot coffee in the morning, probably doesn't help that either. And
as I was labeling before we started, I think that co-regulation for me, I very quickly went to match that pace, and then I've gone, actually, hang on a second, I think I'm running fast. I need to just take a few deep breaths and slow it down a bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of the sensory toolbox that you had mentioned, I know there was someone that had written in a question about asking for some alternatives around chewy items for someone who might be oral seeking.
Yeah.
Should we give a few things a little quick fire to...
That sounds like a good idea.
Build that toolbox out further?
Thank you. That was me running too fast and forgetting some of
what happens. I get it. Sometimes when you're in the fast zone, it makes it tricky to remember all the things you need to do.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we're thinking of alternatives to... So I guess the question was, what are some alternatives to chew toys?
Yeah.
My number one alternative is chewing gum. Now, I know chewing gum has pros and cons. Obviously, you talk to any dentist, and chewing too much gum is not great.
Yeah.
From an anatomy perspective, you're putting a lot of pressure on your temporomandibular joint there, where a lot of that chewing occurs.
Yeah.
And so, over time, that can cause issues.
Yeah.
So there is obviously an element of caution there, but it is a very transferable tool.
Yes, it is.
And if you teach someone, even from a young age, that they can use that to help regulate, it's providing a lot of deep pressure through the jaw, similar to a chewy toy.
Yeah.
Then you can introduce that instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even hearing you strategically incorporate, elements in a day in your diet. I know we were talking about the sensory diet before. That's different. I'm talking about the food that you consume.
Yes.
But like crunchy snacks or things that have that kind of intensity to it in flavour or sensation, and seeing if that helps meet that need too. And the idea would be that you would have that periodically throughout the day to kind of meet that need from a proactive sense. There's lots of other things that you can do for oral regulation too, like blowing up balloons, blowing bubbles, kind of like pom-pom races with a straw, where you're blowing through the straw to try and get a pom-pom to move through a little space that you've created. And so, just trying to get input through the mouth in that way.
Yeah.
But often I find myself when I have families, teachers asking like, I notice that they'll chew a lot. That probably says to me, is there an opportunity that we can incorporate bigger movement across the day so their body's getting really intensive input that meets their needs? And does that then help reduce how often they might access something like that, which is, maybe saying that their body hasn't had as much that it needs prior to that moment, or if they're looking to access some of that input at a smaller scale, is it fidgets or a TheraBand around the chair of the leg to kick against? Are there other little things that we can arm their toolbox with? So when they need something in the moment, they've got a few things that they can access.
Yeah, and I think we've mentioned in previous episodes, I can't remember exactly which one, but you can go through the back catalogue and have a look. I definitely remember talking about the sensory homunculus.
Yeah.
And that part of if you look at the image, or if you Google that, you'll see that the hands and the mouth have a really big neurological or sensory component. If we're talking about, the whole body itself, you see the hands and the mouth are massive in comparison to the rest of the body because the amount of innervation of the nervous system there. So there's a very strong link between the mouth and the hands.
Yep.
So often what we can do is go, okay, if we're mouthing a lot, maybe we need more tactile input.
Yep.
Maybe we need to then, as you said, like big body movement, fantastic. Or do we also provide more tactile input or things for the hands? If it's chewing that they're needing, do we need more deep pressure for the hands and squashing and squeezing and playing with Play-Doh and things like that?
Yep.
Putty, whatever, that can help provide the sensory input the body's looking for through another sensory system.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so hopefully there's a couple of things there that can that person's toolbox out with, and a few things to consider.
Excellent. All right. Any other questions today? I think that was the main one we wanted to get through. And engine chart.
Yeah. Just our little shout out for Fletch.
Yes.
To round the episode off as well.
Absolutely.
Of course.
And if he has an email that he wants to send, he can send to the podcast otfcgroup.au. Otherwise, I don't know if he's on Instagram or TikTok. He might be. May not be.
Got options?
He's got options, but he can send it through there as well, the OTFC group handle for both of those. And
look forward to any other questions that come through on those platforms too.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, team.